because then they might say, well, sure, I can, you know, I can accept that it has some value in its time and place, but so.
But okay, that's where the problem would start for me. It's still that time and place. You know, you get this idea too that like the evolutionary psychologists do this. Well, our evolutionary, where we evolved was the African savanna. And you know, our moral systems are adapted. It's like, why? Why there? Like, why not in the oceans 300 million years ago? You know, like, why is that the preferential place from which our values are derived? The rest of it's just nothing. It's like, I don't understand that. It makes no sense to me at all. Well, you could say that's where we differentiated from chimps. It's like, well, so what? We're not that different from chimps. So, you know, what about the chimps? They have share a lot in common with us. They didn't go through the savannah. It's like, so the idea that these values, say, are shallow, I mean, if you put it in an evolutionary basis and you go back to the African savanna, well, that's something. It's, you know, a few million years anyways. But to me, that's still icing on the cake. It's not deep enough. This is way deeper. Now, the metaphysics. Okay, well, let's talk about the metaphysics. Okay, whose idea of God are you talking about? It's like, is God an old man with a beard? And he lives in the sky? Okay, well, let's take that argument apart a little bit. Okay, first of all, the ancient Jews, they didn't like you to say the name of God. Why? Because they didn't want you to confuse the representation with the phenomena. So whatever was real for them was something beyond words. Okay? The same thing obtains with Taoism. Same idea, right? Don't make a graven image because you confuse the damn image with the thing. What's the thing? It's that which is beyond imaging. Does that which is beyond imaging exist? Obviously. What's its nature? Well, that's a different question. Now, in the Old Testament, its nature is arbitrary, man. It's like, look the hell out. You're going to get swatted down. But if you look carefully at the structure of the Old Testament, and Northrop Frye did this, Frye's argument was basically this. Well, you've got the really old stories. Forget about them. History starts basically with Abraham. What is the Old Testament about? The Israelites climb up to dominance. They get corrupt. They forget about the widows and the children. A prophet comes up and says, you better look out. You're off the path. They ignore him. Whap! They're in chaos for like a long time. They get all humble and they build themselves up again. And when they get power, they get all corrupt. And a prophet comes along and says, you better look out. You're off the path. You're not paying attention to the widows and the children. And all hell's going to break loose. Like bang, down they go. 6 times. 6 times. So, you know, is that arbitrary? Or is that actually the right idea to derive from history? It's like power corrupts. So you make your kingdom, you make your empire, and it's serving its proper purpose. But you let it get corrupt, things are going to fall apart. So I can give you an example of that. It's like, what caused the flooding in New Orleans? Hurricane. No. No. Corruption. If the dikes would have been built properly, as everyone knew they should have been built, if all those millions of dollars had gone into the pockets of corrupt politicians, there wouldn't have been any flood. In Holland, they built the dikes for the worst storm in 10,000 years. In New Orleans, they built them for the worst storm in 100 years. Well, everyone knew that was insufficient. So why didn't they do something about it? Well, if you get corrupt enough, God will send a flood. It's like it's an old story. It's right. It's right. Now the question is, who is God? Well, I would say the ancient Israelites never said who God was. They just said, look the hell out for him. You deviate from the path, man, you're going to get flattened. The people who wrote that book, first of all, like it was assembled loosely as a book, right? It's a bunch of books. That's what Bible means. It was edited and assembled across vast stretches of time. We have no idea what process led people to assemble it that way, except that they felt that that made sense. You know, so they were guided by their internal intuition of meaning. Weirdly enough, it produced a document with a narrative. Now, the narrative is difficult in some ways to discern, given all the detail. You know, so I would say, give our ancestors a break, for God's sake. What do you want? You want absolute, perfect coherence when they're trying to be so inclusive? Like, it's very hard to be coherent when you're trying to be inclusive. Those two things battle. So, you know, have a little respect. That's how it looks to me. Those people weren't stupid. They were seriously not stupid. And what they thought was not stupid. Now, we can look at it in other ways. Why is God in the sky? Well, I know you can't see it in the city. What's the fastest way to see infinity? I'll look up at the night sky. It's like, why is God up there? Because when you look at the night sky, that's how you feel. So is that wrong? Well, it's not bad. It's like, well, where's the infinite? Because that's really the question. Well, it seems to be up there. It's like, yeah, right. Okay, so you make your sacrifices. It's like, why do people do that? God, that's primitive. It's like, no. The invention of the sacrifice was probably the single greatest stroke of genius that mankind ever was given or produced. What is a sacrifice? You give up something of value now so that things might be better in the future. It's like, that's the human discovery. That's the human discovery of time. Everybody makes sacrifices. It's like, I'm going to go to university instead of partying and, snorting cocaine. It's like, because that's fun. Why? Well, because if I organize my behavior properly and I make the right sacrifices, God will smile on me in the future, or at least the probability seems enhanced. It's like, okay, well, we don't use the same terminology. Well, we use the same terminology. We don't burn rabbits, but then again, we're not agriculturalists. So the people who were playing with the idea of sacrifice, like they were acting out the discovery of time. You can give up something now. Try to get a bone from a dog and tell him you're going to give him 2 bones. It's like, he doesn't give a damn about that. Bone now. And we regard the civilized person as the person who's capable of deferring gratification. Deferring gratification is a sacrifice. Does it please God? Well, everyone thinks so, or they wouldn't do it. So you burn the sacrifice. Why? Well, God's in heaven. How else is he going to figure out the quality of your sacrifice? Well, you might say, well, that's primitive. It's like, don't be so sure. It's like they got the sacrifice idea right. They got the awe part right. Like if they're acting it out, it's concretized. It's like a drama. Does that make it primitive? Well, no, it's not primitive. It's unbelievably sophisticated. It's ridiculously sophisticated. Because the mode in the Old Testament is you make the right sacrifices and you will thrive. It's like, do we believe that? Yeah, it's the basis of civilized behavior. You don't get a complex civilization without that presupposition.
So I think we've actually done quite well.
Good. It's hard to keep to a linear track. Eh?
Exactly.
This is another problem with this kind of material. It's like Jung called that the process of coming to terms with this material a circumambulation, a continual wandering around a center. And you sort of specify the center by almost by inference. So it's one of the things that make Jung very difficult to read, because everything that he says is dependent on all the other things he said. That's one of the problems I ran into when I was writing Maps of Meaning too. It's like there's a presupposition at the bottom that you have to accept in order to follow the logic, and the presupposition is there are alternative ways of laying out your initial presuppositions about the nature of reality. It's like, well, why should I accept that? Well, I can't show you why till you accept it because I can't walk you through the argument. It's a paradigm problem, fundamentally.